It has to do with the confusion between class sizes and student-teacher ratios. We said, I think the presentation said that student-teacher ratios were at 15.4 students per teacher, but yet many people are citing class sizes out there that have considerably more than that, 25, 27 students, in a couple cases in some high school classes, 30 students, and perhaps you could explain the distinction between the two.
Do you want that one or do you want me to take that one?
I can take that one.
I can too.
Go ahead.
All right. The figures that we receive on what's called the CUP report from the Ohio Department of Education takes our student enrollment and takes all staff members that we have in the school district, and that's the divisor that they use to determine student-teacher ratio. Because we get that question quite often, usually around levy time. People actually think that we only are running classrooms with 16 people, and I know I see some teachers out here, especially elementary teachers, that have sometimes 26, 27, 28. So that's usually the misperception, I guess you would call it, when we put the forms out from the ODE and they measure that by student-teacher ratio. All staff members, that would include unified arts, guidance counselors. I believe they may. Do they throw administrators in that equation also? Librarian, right? Media specialist. So it usually comes out around that that 15-to-1. But again, we encourage anyone and everyone to go into our buildings, because I think you'll see that most of our classrooms have the 25-to-1 student-teacher ratio. In fact, many of them have more than that.
With regard to rising class sizes, are there any plans to change the school calendar? For example, a balanced calendar, shorter summers, longer breaks, 4-day school weeks, school year start earlier, any kind of adjustments in the school calendar that the Board of Education has considered?
Yes, we are currently looking, I believe it's 2 years out at starting earlier in the school year, and that would be approximately mid-August. That would end the first semester at the holiday break, which would be a lot more convenient for the students, because usually what happens now is we go through our holiday break, they come back for 2 weeks of class time, then they take their semester exams. So we are looking at starting in mid-August, which in turn would give us enough days to end that semester break during the holiday break, and then when they came back after that 2-week break, they would then start in on the second semester.
Next question, I think, probably is going to require a couple of you to address. It has to do with the fact that, and of course, we figured that House Bill 136 at some point would come up. Last Thursday, the Dublin City Board of Education approved a resolution to oppose House Bill 136, the school choice bill. The question that a number of people are asking is, number one, Dr. Lucas and Becky, is the Olentangy Local School Board Board of Education interested in putting forth a formal resolution in opposition to House Bill 136? And of course, obviously, Representative Brenner, I think, probably wants the opportunity to address the bill as well. So,
we have had that discussion at the board level in regard to the resolution. Right now, we have not passed a resolution. Representative Brenner and I have talked many times, as I know our president, Julie Wagner-Fiesel, has also had discussions with him. I think I can speak for Andy here, and if not, I'm sure he'll correct me, but he does understand what type of position that puts us in as a school district. We have not determined yet whether we will pass a resolution or not, because right now we're still at the table with our representative, and I think he's been very receptive to sitting down and listening to our concerns. I think there have been some changes in House Bill 136 as a result of those talks. If I had my way, obviously that bill would go away completely. But I don't have my way in regard to that, but it will affect our school district in a negative way, and we will continue to work with Representative Brenner. Becky, do you have anything in regard to what type of effect that will have on the school district?
Based on the preliminary numbers that we've seen, that could cost the district up to $5.2 million in revenue loss. There are 1,505 vouchers that are available to Olentangy students, and if all of those students took advantage of those, it would be about $5.2 million.
To kind of address that, I will say yes, I am a supporter of the bill. And in fact, we've had many hearings in the Education Committee over the bill. I have talked to the bill's main sponsor, and it looks like we are going to have some modifications made based on conversations I've had with Olentangy, as well as other schools have contacted my office, as well as the other members of the House over the bill. I am a school choice advocate, so I should say that, in general, because there are many school systems as opposed to Olentangy that are in far worse shape, and I'm not just a little bit, but significantly. And I personally don't think that many people would take advantage of it in the Olentangy school system. With that being said, I believe the bill sponsor is going to be putting caps on the amounts of dollars that would be coming out. So the dollar figure that you're hearing there, I do not believe it will be close to that based on the conversations I've had with the bill sponsor, and as well as conversations we've had with other members of our committee. What I would like to see, House Bill 136 is basically it's an educational scholarship bill, and that money would be available to students. And the difference between this and the Ed Choice scholarships, which are out there right now, is Ed Choice is only available in school districts that are an academic watch or an academic emergency. And this would open it up to anybody in the state of Ohio to be able to apply for those scholarships. The difference is that the House Bill 136 does have an income limit. I think that will probably be lowered a bit as well. But the income limit is graduated so that the more you make, the less potential you can receive in a scholarship. Additionally, the scholarships can only be activated once the Ed Choice scholarships are used up. So there are some caps and phase-ins built into this bill as it is right now, but I believe that there are going to be some additional changes that I think should satisfy members of Olentangy as well as the other school districts here in Delaware County on that bill. I will say also that I have an alternative bill, House Bill 242, which is undergoing some hearings right now. That is a tax credit bill for scholarship organizations. And what that allows is it allows businesses to donate money to these educational scholarship organizations up to $300,000 and be able to write off dollar for dollar in credits, as well as individuals can donate up to $3,000 to these educational scholarship organizations. And this bill would allow additional $20 million into the system. So this is money that is above and beyond. It does not take from anything locally. It comes out of the general revenue budget separately and is a different line item altogether. So this would be actually additional money available. Those scholarships would be available for $5,000. And I think that is a good alternative because that keeps the money in the private sector. It keeps the money also with educational scholarship organizations so that it keeps the overhead down on that. And that is money that doesn't take away from any of the existing school systems. So I think that is definitely a difference. We're trying to move that bill forward right now. Been working with Kasich administration as well as members in our House to try to get that bill going. I believe we have a hearing on that this week as well.
And Tom, if I could add, I think our constituents need to understand, though, bottom line with House Bill 136, if the bill does go through, we have the potential to lose anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000 per student. And right now, we only get approximately $500 per student from the state for our students. So when I bring those concerns up and I hear individuals at the State Department say You won't lose local dollars. That's the only thing we can lose because most of our money is local dollars. Therefore, we are passing levies for private, non-public schools, and I'm not sure that's what we sold our levies on to fund other school systems around our organization.
I would like to respond to that. I disagree. That is not, the bill specifically prohibits the use of local tax dollars for that. It would only be coming from the state funding portion. And at this point, like I said, I believe that is also going to be changed. The bill has not made it to the House floor yet, and I believe there will be some modifications. But local tax dollars that you and I vote for, I live in the Olentangy district as well, those dollars will remain in Olentangy. So I want to make that clear that the bill does not take the local tax dollars.
But I also want to add, when the state takes our money, we have to make that money up with local tax dollars. So therefore, when you take our state funding, you take our local funding.
Well, I would say that I would like to see more state funding come to the local level by actually rewarding the good school systems. And whether we use the value-added method or some other method, Olentangy has received excellent distinction, I believe, as all the schools in Delaware County. And we haven't done anything to actually reward the systems that are doing the good job. Now, people have chosen to move to Delaware County and live in the Olentangy school system because of the schools. So in a way, they have school choice to that extent, and they've moved here because of that. The problem that I see right now is that our entire system is basically designed to reward systems that are failing by giving them additional dollars. And I think we should start putting caps on the amount of money that go to the systems that fail. And if that means the state has to step in and start taking over the administration of some of those systems, then maybe we need to do that. But receiving, and I got into an argument in our own caucus along with some of the other reps, over the fact that we're only receiving in Olentangy about $450, $500 per student in state aid back. And we're actually sending out hundreds of millions of dollars. If we just went and had all the dollars follow the student from the state, approximately $4,000 per student, that would increase funding to Olentangy, for example, by an additional $67 million based on the number of students that we have here. So even if we make some modifications, and I'm not saying we can do that because you have to still help the school systems that are in poverty and are failing, but if we can at least make some modifications to the funding formula, that would help our local taxpayers out here. And I think that all of you would be definitely glad to hear that, because then you wouldn't have to go and approve these levies every 4 years like we're doing right now.
Thank you. Several questions related to the tax issue, growth, overcrowding, some of those issues. So in order to bring the county auditor into the conversation, is there any consideration being given now to work, for example, with local zoning boards, township trustees, to do something to try to limit the growth, such as building requirements that for larger lots, or controlling the number of multifamily housing? Is there any of that discussion? Is it going on? Has it occurred? Do you anticipate it might ever occur?
Well, I know that there has been at least some discussion of that issue when we had the strategic planning meeting with the work group of the Olentangy School District. I don't remember what that work group is called, but that was definitely a concern. But again, these zoning is established by the legislative jurisdiction for each political subdivision. So you don't have one body that establishes zoning for the entire school district. Secondly, the county auditor really doesn't have any authority or any, direct involvement with respect to development plans or zoning or density issues. Those are all typically approved by a city council or the township trustees, depending on where that development is occurring. And it's a very good point. It does, when you have when you have more densely populated areas in terms of development, that's going to increase the number of students, and that in turn then is going to translate into growth into the school district and additional costs to educate those students.
All right, getting very specific then in terms of the overcrowding conditions, in terms of particularly noting that Liberty High School is fairly close to capacity. Mm-hmm. The other two high schools apparently are not as full at this point. And so what's being considered perhaps to address the problem is redistricting an option.
Well, I think right now we're in what's called the discussion stage, and of course we tell everyone when we're in the discussion stage everything is on the table, and oftentimes that's how rumors get started, because you discuss all options. At the board level, we just completed the development committee capacity report. We know that if we continue to do things as we have always done them, that we are in need of a fourth high school. We're in need of a sixth middle school. Probably can push the elementary 16, and possibly never have to build another elementary after 16. We do know this after this report. We also know this. We know that a new high school costs approximately $60 million and adds anywhere from $5 to $7 million per year to your operating costs. We know that a middle school is right around $30 million, and it's going to add anywhere from $3 to $5 million to your operating costs. And when we talk with our constituents, we hear this. We are somewhat tired of taxes. So therefore, I think when we heard the capacity report last week at the board meeting and heard when we would have to be on the ballot, potentially as early as 2013 in the spring, I think that wasn't something that any of us were looking forward to, because if you've heard me on the levy trail, I think there are a few things that I dislike more than running tax levy campaigns, maybe a sharp stick in the eye. That would be one of them, something, a beating, whatever that may be. It's just no fun. It's absolutely no fun. So therefore, our next step is, okay, let's look at the scheduling piece. Let's think about how can we schedule our kids in to various classrooms at different times. Does that increase our capacity? Well, I think it absolutely does. There's no question about it. We will have that report in January. Right now we have a task force put together addressing that Liberty High School overcrowding. I believe it's this week when we start calling in all of our administrators that will be affected, much like we did at the Orange Middle School overcrowding process. And we know that we can make this last for a while and put it out into the future. But another thing that has somewhat been beneficial to us is the fact that my cell phone keeps ringing. I know the weather's bad. We know that Columbus State has moved in to Route 23, and we know that we would like to collaborate very much with them. So therefore, that's somewhat opened up our options also in regard to some of the things that we may offer for our students. Last but not least, we have Project 2020. It's been in process for approximately 8 months. It's going to report to the board, specifically some of the findings and recommendations of what this entire educational piece will look like in 2020. One thing we can tell you for certain, education in 2020 is going to look different than what it does in 2011. It's going to look much different. And we need to stay ahead of the curve. We need to get our kids into college at a sooner time. We need to graduate them with college credit so that we can also save our taxpayers money on the back end of their journey. 1 year's worth of college tuition would be very beneficial. Those are the things we continue to look at because we have a window of opportunity here to make this change from what we've always done. And that's been the charge of Project 2020. Here's the bottom line. If our community wants more schools and are willing to pay additional tax dollars for that, we will definitely do that. But I want to make sure before we get to that scenario that we have turned every stone over and we've looked at every option that we potentially can. And I think you're going to see in this scheduling report, I think you're going to see a lot of things that we can do that we've really never done before because basically we haven't had to. I don't think it will affect the educational program, and I think it'll be very beneficial to our students, especially our juniors and seniors.
One of the other questions I think that was related to this, Dr. Lucas, had to do with, the whole facilities issue and whether there would be additional construction. I think that probably for both the county auditor and the treasurer, some, comments about bonding capacity, for example, because obviously property values play a role in bonding capacity, and just, what are those possibilities? And one person who made the comment, you said, we wouldn't have the tax increase, but if we have to build, that's a tax increase. It's just not going for operating expenses. So would anybody like to address that issue about bonding capacity and those kinds of things?
Don't say anything about.
Well, we have sufficient bonding capacity in terms of the overlapping debt issues. I don't think we're coming up against any direct or indirect debt limits that I'm aware of. But again, that would involve a levy. You'd need to pass a bond levy to service the debt for that construction.
Yeah, we have not passed any levies yet that would build high school number 4 or middle school number 6. So we would definitely have to go back to the voters and ask for additional dollars to do those. As far as bonding capacity, I know with the state of Ohio, the Department of Education, we were already considered a special needs district because our debt is so high compared to our revenues that we bring in. But we've not had any issues getting that approved because we can always show the need, and then of course because we've passed a levy to fund the building.
When I first read this question, I thought, oh yeah, right. And then it turned up on several other cards. And it kind of is a question about why is the district so adamant about stretching a planned 3-year levy to 4 years in light of the fact that the past millage was, according to the card, a minimal amount, and also the cuts in state aid the district faces. Why not put another one on the ballot in 3 years? And believe me, that was not just one card.
Well, I think from a levy standpoint, you go with what you, 1, how much money you need, 2, how many mills will pass, and 3, obviously the most important one is what you think your community will support. Not only this year, but in the past several years, and Tom being part of BASS, I believe the levies have been passing at approximately between 20 and 30% of the levies passing.
New operating money last week, 22.4% of the requests for new operating money in school districts around the state passed.
22%. So therefore, you try to come to a happy medium of what our constituents will support and what dollars we need, and that's a hard question to answer because if you ask that question of everyone in this theater tonight, we would probably have many different answers. So at the board level, we've had the conversation, and I believe it was a month or so ago where it was an agreement to say, look, we need to make this levy last 4 years. I think that's great news for us from an administrative standpoint because that gives us somewhat of a parameter to work upon. The landscape, the financial landscape in education is not going to get any better. I'd love to sit up here and say, you know what, I think the state will come through with dollars that we've never seen before. That's not going to happen. In fact, we're planning for the future of $0 from the state. We get roughly 5% of our funding right now. So we're planning for $0 from the state. So that means that we're as locally controlled as any school district in central Ohio outside of potentially Upper Arlington. I think they get about 2% of their dollars from the state. So I think it's critical that we have this partnership with our community and say, what will you support? I don't know what they will support. I do think it's a span of 4 years. Again, we have 5 board members that have constituents in the community. We will be doing a survey. We continue to survey individuals. I haven't had anyone approach me and say, how soon are you going to put another levy on? And I don't think I'll ever have anyone approach me with that in regard to, I'd like to pay more. I think we're being pressured from all sides to get more out of our tax dollars than what we have in the past, and I think we'll continue to be pressured. So it's not a happy situation by no means, and it sometimes creates a confrontational issue. But what we try to continue to do is get input from our constituents and telling us how often can we come back and how long does this levy need to last. You want to add anything to that?
I think you're absolutely right, Dr. Lucas. I know that when we were on the ballot this last time, we did hear a lot from our community. I know Dr. Lucas went to, was at least 150 coffee chats where he was invited into community homes, and that's exactly what we heard. We need to make our tax dollars last longer, and so that's where the board is coming from, and that's the direction that we need to go in. There's no point in going back to the voters if we don't think they're going to pass a levy.
I can tell you this much. I think we have just a fantastic school system. I think it hasn't happened overnight. It's taken years to build, and it continues to go in a positive direction. But all you have to do is study areas around you. I don't want to be in a situation where we have to make massive expenditure reductions due to levy failure. And we don't have to go very far to see what that's like. We should learn from those situations. As Becky said, I did 150 coffee chats, and that was representation from every school building in the school system. The way we set those up is we had several from each school host a chat. Across the district, it was, okay, the basic attitude was, you know what, we love this school system. We hate taxes, but we love this school system. And we really want to keep this the way it is, but we need a little give and take here. And you need to, if you come back, several of those coffee chats, the comment was, if you're back here in 3 years and nothing has changed, my yes vote will guarantee to be a no vote. And I hear that loud and clear. And I don't like hearing that, obviously. It's not a great thing to hear. But I think this school system belongs to this community. When I'm gone, it's still going to be here. Those educators in the crowd, when you're gone, it's still going to be here. I think it's critical that we leave this community a legacy of something that they can afford and something that is very high quality. That's what they have right now. We need to maintain that.
Several of the questions had to do with the cuts that were made before, previous cuts. And a couple of them have to do with a question about the impact that the elimination of the random drug testing has had and whether there are any plans to reinstate the drug testing program.
Well, we are currently working with the group that did our drug testing in regard to a task force. We're bringing in high school principals and working with this group. Here's another thing you have to understand. We have a superintendent committee, the athletic group, and we've also bounced that piece. We just didn't wake up one day and say, let's do away with drug testing. We talked to individual community members. We talked to staff members. We talked to coaches. And we will continue to do that. So we are looking at whether it's something that is sustainable. And we're also looking at something if we may have other alternative funding methods to fund drug testing in lieu of coming out of the general fund. So that will continue. I believe we have a meeting coming up in December on that.
Another question related to the test that had to do with the elimination of the middle school athletic director positions.
Yes. And the question was?
Well, the question was, there are two parts to the question. Number one was, has that been successful? And the second one, could it be possible for the district to have one full-time athletic director that would cover all athletics in the district?
Well, I think anything's possible, as they say, as long as you don't have to do the work. Anything's possible. But from giving those high school athletic directors the responsibility of a true 7 through 12 program has been somewhat challenging, but it has been very positive so far. Now, granted, we're only into the fall season of that change. So I think that's something that we always continue to go back and say, okay, is this working the way we want this to work? So we'll continue to look at that. Right now, it has been effective. We have saved some dollars. We did move those middle school athletic directors into assistant principal positions of the new buildings that we opened. So we did use them as administrators. So they did not lose their jobs. But we'll continue to monitor that. But right now, it has been a positive experience.
Some questions also were raised about the things that were cut, as well as things that were cut. For example, is the district going to keep proceeding with the all-day, everyday kindergarten program, even though there aren't a lot of dollars to support it?
Well, I think we got into this all-day, everyday kindergarten program out of a mandate from the state, and I'm not going to go back and rehash that. That's something that we were mandated that said you will provide all-day, everyday kindergarten to your students. So therefore, we started down that path, and then, of course, unlike school districts that have 2,500 students, we had 1,400 kindergartners. So it's not something like, okay, let's dust off a couple rooms here for all-day, everyday kindergarten. We had to build a new building. In fact, we probably had to build 1.5 new buildings. And that was our concern when the mandate came down. And, of course, right in the middle of the travels that we were on, it was all no. Change in administration, we changed our mind. You really don't have to have all-day, everyday kindergarten. So therefore, we implemented a partial all-day, everyday kindergarten program. It's part of our newest elementary, Heritage Elementary, and we targeted 300 of our most at-need kindergarten students. We're looking at that, and we're going to have that decision in December. But I will tell you this. Again, we have a capacity problem, and we have to address that. So if we have to, or if we go to a full all-day, everyday kindergarten program for 1,400 students, we don't have the room for that. So we have to make some type of a decision. Now, granted, I think our program's fantastic, those 300 students, but we also have to look at what's best overall for our school system from a finance standpoint. We've been excellent with distinction for 8 years in a row, meaning we had excellent with distinction before all day, every day, and we'll probably continue to have excellent with distinction after all day, every day. So in a roundabout way, reading between the lines, it doesn't look good for all-day, everyday kindergarten from a finance and capacity standpoint, but we'll have that decision or that report in December.
A number of questions had to do with, made comments about, for example, the amount of income tax dollars flowing from the Olentangy local school district to the state, and then, like many other communities, not getting the same number of dollars back, not just through the school district, but through other state programs. And also about the funding formula itself. And I guess the question is not, it's really about what does Representative Brenner know, because this certainly isn't his responsibility at this point, because the current administration has promised a new funding formula either for next year or for the following year. Has there been any word from the administration in terms of when we might see that?
Well, yeah, I've been in communication with the administration over the last couple of weeks, and in fact, major discussion was, are we going to go forward next spring with an education funding review and redo? I think there is a good chance that you're going to take a look at that. Like I said, I would like to see a system where they start putting the funding towards a reward system for the schools that are performing better. That way you have, in a way, kind of the free market working. So the better systems, the more that they improve, the more the funding, and or I would also say if the funding isn't going to be there, like potentially in the future, then we allow a lot more flexibility for the local school system and the local school board to make the decisions. And I would definitely be looking to support that kind of a position to say, okay, well, if you're not going to receive any state funding or only $500 per student in this case, then we can undo a lot of the mandates. In fact, House Bill 30, which is the one that eliminated the requirement of all-day kindergarten, which was signed into law. I mean, the studies that I've seen and heard, it sounds like all-day kindergarten is definitely something that you would probably want. It helps students in the future. The problem is it gets down to a funding problem. But when you have some systems that are receiving $12,000 to $14,000 in state aid, and there's still 54% of their students are graduating from high school, that's a problem. And that's a problem with, I believe, management. I believe that's a problem that there are other problems there, obviously, usually drug related and so forth. But the state's going to have to relook at those areas because, I mean, there are literally hundreds of millions of dollars being funneled into those areas that they're just not effective. They're getting wasted. Whereas marginally, if you brought an additional $500 per student back to the Olentangy school system, that would stretch our dollars here a lot further than it would, say, in a school system where an additional $500 or $100 or $1,000 really marginally has done absolutely nothing. So I would like to see the state start to review this from an economic standpoint of where their dollars are going marginally and what is actually doing things to improve it. So I would hope that we have an education funding formula change next spring, and I hope it would take those things into consideration because I know it would definitely help all the school districts out here in Delaware County, not just Olentangy.
I will add to that, if I may, Representative Brenner. Again, he's been very receptive. In fact, I believe we meet Wednesday?
This Wednesday, yes.
Yeah, with representatives from Northeast Ohio and superintendents to look at potential options for a new school funding formula. So I can assure you that, what he says, he does back up and is willing to sit down and just talk about that entire issue, and we're very appreciative of that.
During the presentations, there was a discussion, for example, of the Diversity Committee, one of the new initiatives of the district. Just perhaps, there were a few people who had questions then about what percentage of the students do reflect the minority, or what's the percentage of new hires or current staff who are minorities, for example, and plans that committee may have been considering in terms of promoting the diversity within the Olentangy local school district.
Well, I think first and foremost, as I said in the presentation, the Diversity Committee has just done a fantastic job. We've not done a great job from a diversity standpoint. We're not going to sit up here and say, yes, we've done a fantastic job in the past. I think Gail Marsh and Todd Corley, who is heading up the Diversity Committee, has done a tremendous job. I know at one time one of our challenges was to have a more diverse staff or more diverse staff members even apply at Olentangy. I think the Diversity Committee has done a great job recruiting. The second thing that we wanted to get to was not only once we get various staff members in the Olentangy local schools, how do we retain them? Making sure that we are providing them support systems in our organization and in our community that kind of sends a positive message to those individuals that we appreciate you being here and we very much want you to stay and want you to feel welcome. So we have made inroads. We by far are not where we want to be because I think one of the goals that we talked about, at least Mr. Marsh and I, was, look, we've got to get the staff percentage at least to the student percentage from a diverse standpoint. We're not there. we are doing better, and we will continue to do better, and that's going to be because of the work of the Diversity Committee.
Again, going back to some of the questions talking about the cuts that were made or any proposed cuts, just has there been any assessment on what the effect would be of reducing the literacy support staff and teaching in light of the fact that Olentangy has such outstanding results in its reading scores?
Well, I think our Cheshire Elementary, for example, when we opened Cheshire, we only had one lit support in lieu of two. I think in the past, again, as we have opened buildings, we've wanted to keep things as they were or as they are, so therefore there was always a certain operation cost or fixed cost that you have to hire due to the fact that you just opened a building 2 years ago and they got this number of individuals. I don't think any organization works that way because I think, again, they look at productivity and they look at efficiency. So we did open Cheshire with only one lit support in lieu of two. And again, the scores speak for themselves as far as how the performance goes. So we have looked at those areas. All options and areas are on the table. That by no means goes to hint that we're just out just to cut everything. I think, again, education is probably the slowest organization to get to modern times. We've somewhat had a system that looks the same over the past 100 years. So some of the things that we've had in the past we may not have, but we like to say that we're restructuring those things, still providing opportunity for our kids. It may not look the same. So we will continue to look at lit support. I mean, there are a lot of areas that we will continue to look at in regard to expenditure reductions.
I think that there were several questions that had to do with gifted education.
Yes.
All right, and I think that just from my own observation, I know that the General Assembly itself has wrestled with that question in terms of, the availability of resources and trying to, support the gifted community, which has created real challenges, for them. So there are probably a few parts to this question. Number one would be the percentage of the children currently enrolled in school here who are receiving gifted services as opposed to being identified for gifted services.
The percentage, the beauty of Olentangy, and I say this in a very nice way, is everyone's child is gifted, and again, that's a good thing. We have provided Javits training for all of our staff members because I think the programs of the gifted in the past somewhat was a silo effect where we pulled out kids and we put them in a gifted program for maybe 1 day a week. And we really looked at a more inclusive plan. We have gifted clusters. We do have a high percentage of gifted. Some buildings are higher than others. That's another thing that we've looked at because we have gifted teachers in every one of our elementaries. Some of them work with a high number of students and some of them may not. And again, I don't say that in a detrimental way to those buildings that don't have a higher percentage of gifted. But I think that's going to be an issue that we will continue to be challenged with, not only today but in the future, because our kids do come to us performing at a very high level. And I think you will see that many of our students may receive gifted services at the younger age, even before they're tested. And that's not a bad thing. We have staff members that are willing to step forward and do the extra things that it takes to provide those types of services to our kids. And I think the further we go into the future with the Javits training, the better our, I'll call, regular education teachers will be at serving those gifted students. Because, again, when you look back at those pull-out programs, you're not just gifted on Wednesday. If you're gifted, you're gifted. And I'm also a firm believer that we have a high percentage of students that are gifted in somewhere, sometime, whether it's academically, whether it's athletically, whether it's through the arts, and we have to serve those kids. We have to all serve those kids. We can't just say, well, you're gifted, so you go over there, and you're regular, so you go over there. We all live in a society where we function together, so I think it's critical that we continue to have those cluster groups. We practice the inclusion piece not only for special education, but for gifted education, and understand that we give our staff members the expertise to be able to teach to those gifted kids.
I think one of the other questions that arose, though, was there seemed to be from the presentation a tremendous difference between the number of students who were identified as gifted as opposed to those students who were identified as being students with disabilities. Perhaps you would like to address the identification process since that may influence that difference in that number.
Right. I believe that, in fact, the gifted number was right around 5,500, and the student disability piece was around 1,500. Of course, from a testing standpoint, part of that testing includes the in-view at a young age, as far as whether you're identified gifted or not. But I'm not sure if the question is, why do you have a high percentage of gifted kids versus a low percentage of students with disability?
Or a lower percentage.
Or a lower percentage. And I'm not sure how what they're wanting me to address is, why do we have a lower percentage of students with disability and a higher percentage of gifted kids? Or
I think the comment that was made was it just seemed to be a discrepancy.
Right.
And, to go through then perhaps briefly the identification process, which doesn't require the multi-factor evaluation and those kinds of
Right.
things, might be useful for
Yeah.
those people who asked that question.
Right. Well, and again, that in-view piece identifies those gifted students at a very young age. And we do have a high percentage of gifted individuals, especially in comparison to the number of kids that we have on disabilities. But again, I think there are a spectrum of students, and we have to teach all 16,800, and I think it's critical that we don't put them into categories. Gifted education, special education, those aren't places. Special education is not a place. It's a service. Gifted education is not a place. It's a service. And I think it's critical that we make sure all of our staff members have the tools, the knowledge, the expertise to address those learning needs of all students.
Very good. Several of the questions then wanted to have some discussion overall then about where are salaries and benefits moving within the Olentangy Local School District. You did have, if I recall on your slides, for example, you showed a couple of groups that had accepted wage freezes. And, what's happening with the cost then of insurance benefits, what's happening then with what do you project is happening with salaries, those kinds of issues looking down the road.
For salaries, we have included in our 5-year forecast 0 base wage increases, and that it kind of coincides with what House Bill 153 attempts to do with the Race to the Top program, which changes over to a merit-based pay, although we don't have that in place yet. So we've taken base pay increases out of the forecast. We do have about a 2.7% increase in the 5-year forecast for merit or step-based increases. But as we always say, everything is always on the table. Those areas are subject to negotiation. Our insurance costs have been increasing. This past year, our premiums increased 9.7%. We just had a meeting with our insurance committee last week and saw that our claims are running very hot, and so we will expect to see some kind of an increase in our premiums next year. So the district definitely needs to do something to get those costs under control as well. So the board does have a task force that Mr. O'Brien chairs, and our HR director, Gail Marsh, and myself sit on to try to come up with different options that the board can look at to perhaps introduce. But again, those are all negotiated items with the majority of our folks.
I might add also, Tom, I think the toughest conversation to have as an educator is, how much money do you make? Believe me, if anyone doesn't know that conversation well, I would be one that knows that very well. I know when I first came to Olentangy, I got a call from my buddy in Bermuda that said, I'm looking at your contract here online. So we do not make any excuses for what we make, but we also know this. Again, I think that goes back to local control. I think that goes back to a community that very much supports their schools, wants to support their schools. But I think we need to continue to have that conversation because it is 85% of our budget. Bottom line, salary and benefits, 85% of our budget. I think I would speak for anyone to say, you know what, we deserve every penny of it. But, when you're out there talking to individuals that support your school and support you financially, I have to tell you this, it makes you defensive at times. They're pretty blunt about, well, maybe you don't. Maybe you don't deserve that. Unfortunately, we're in the public school business, so we have to somewhat justify. I always said, you don't have to apologize for what you make in today's world, but you do have to justify what you make. That's the type of pushback we get from taxpayers. And it's not just in Olentangy. I mean, all you have to do is read the headlines, see the levies that go down. And those levies go down, they're not because of the performance of the school district. Those are excellent with distinction districts. They go down because people say, I'm tired of paying taxes. What can you do to give me some tax relief? So I think it has to be part of the conversation, and it is part of the negotiation piece. And people love the school system, and they will continue to support it, but it's not an open checkbook. And we have to understand that and realize that. And we have to continue to work with our community and say, okay, get us in the ballpark here, back and forth.
This question is for Dr. Lucas and Mrs. Jenkins. Will there be, and I have the slightest idea what it means, will there be another School Fund Finance 101 session?
Yes. And Tom, to update you on that and update anyone else, we have, I guess it's been 2 years now, where we have provided School Finance 101 because I have to tell you this, you almost have to have an MBA to understand school finance in this state because very few people really understand it. All we're trying to do is get the basics of school finance. It's been a very, very successful program, a lot of participation, and I believe, this spring we'll probably start that again? School Finance 101?
I have not seen the dates yet, but I'm sure that we'll offer that again. It was very well received, and I think it's just a great thing to have to help educate not only our employees, but also our community on how funding for Olentangy works.
Some of the questions also ask you to take a look into the future at what instruction, and particularly instructional materials, are looking like. One person even made a comment about 3 children in the district, and basically the teachers aren't using the textbooks in those classrooms, whether it's online. But the question comes down to, should we be investing in instructional materials when those instructional materials may be optional? And probably then tie that in with some of the other questions that related to, you pointed out, for example, dual enrollment and some of those other options, some of which will be dependent upon technology, possibly.
Absolutely.
So maybe you want to address, as you're looking at, you made the comment earlier that education is going to look a lot different down the road. Go ahead and look in the crystal ball then, because people are concerned about, why are we spending money on teaching kids this way if this isn't the way that we're going to be educating them 5 years from now?
Well, and I think part of that reduction that we've had has been textbooks, and I think it will continue to be textbooks. But I think when you talk to kids, when you talk about, what's a textbook, this is a textbook to a kid, to a student. An iPad may be a textbook to a student. So I don't think you're ever going to get to the point where you buy nothing and just say, well, good luck on finding this information. But I think we continue to look at the online option from a curriculum standpoint, and even textbook companies are going that route too. So I'm not sure that in 2020, for example, we have McGraw-Hill right here, that's local. I'm not sure they'll be making textbooks for people in 2020. So we continue to look at those options. But I think the most exciting part of that whole future piece is not just in the textbook piece, it is in the, what are we here to provide for our students, and giving them the flexibility to have a variety of course offerings at basically the same cost. And in order to get to that, we have things like flex credit, we have things like post-secondary options, but I think the most critical one that we have to really hone in on is dual enrollment, because we can give our students the opportunity to get either AP credit. If you want to go to the AP route, say you're going to a university out of state that won't take a Columbus State credit or an Ohio school credit. Okay, you want to go the AP route, let's give you the flexibility to do that. You want to take the college credit route, and you have that option as a student. We're in discussion now with Columbus State, looking at aligning that AP coursework with their college coursework. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. Unfortunately, it does come down to dollars, and I keep coming back with this. If I can give you an option as a taxpayer to maybe raise your taxes during your son or daughter's school career in Olentangy over a 12 or 13-year period, but I can also guarantee you at the end of that journey that we can put between $15,000 and $20,000 in your pocket in college credit, are you more likely to support continued tax increases? Not open checkbook policy, by the way, just continued tax increases. Most of the comments we've received, and again, that's anecdotal evidence, I'm not saying that it's just back here and what I talk with people is, we'd be very much in favor of that, because that gives our child the flexibility to either go the AP route or go the college credit route.
Would you also then like to expand a little bit on that whole flex credit issue, the dual enrollment, and the special kinds of programs that you're doing here?
Well, I think the beauty of flex credit is the fact that our students will drive flex credit. We're not going to have to drive it. Right now, I think it's going to start increasing in popularity, much like our alternative education program, where we started with 2, the word got out, now we're 68, now we're to 130. I think with flex credit, which, by the way, is already on the scene, I know that I often get requests from high school kids to say, why don't you push your time back? All the research shows that high school kids need more morning sleep versus, they go to bed late and they don't need to get up early. Well, we already have that from a flex credit standpoint. And I think when you look down the road at the potential option of a junior-senior option with a partnership with the university, which, by the way, already has bridged the gap to Ohio State and Ohio Wesleyan and Otterbein and Capital. They've already bridged that gap. Why would we not work with them? That would open up that schedule for those kids. Some of them may not come to school till 10 o'clock. Now, those are juniors and seniors, granted. Oftentimes at coffee chats, I'll get the question, well, you can't let second graders stay in bed till 10. No. I don't think the elementary program is going to change a whole lot, because I think that's where the foundation is built, and I think that's probably the most critical part. Granted, that shows I started out as a 5th grade teacher. But
very good. I think that as we close this evening, I would like to thank our guests for being here this evening and for sharing with them. I'd like to thank the people in the audience who turned out tonight, and hope that you don't get completely drenched when you go outside and go to your cars. It is, I think that probably Olentangy is very grateful for this turnout this evening.
yes.
The biggest fear you always have is that you have a community forum and nobody shows up. So it is good that you were here, had the opportunity to ask questions. I think that maybe in closing this evening, I would like to read something that somebody wrote on the card, because it contains both a word of praise and a word of warning. I moved to Olentangy because I believe in a good education for my children. I am worried about cuts to academic classes. My house wasn't cheap, but my family chooses to sacrifice to support the schools. I want the same course offerings. I want them to remain the same. I want to continue getting the best teachers attracted to the district. Please tell me course diversity and teachers will be protected. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here.